We've covered all the life that lives on or in the bottom of the oceans, the benthic life, but now I want to talk about the pelagic life, the animals that live up within the water column. And these are typically of two varieties. We've talked about these before. They're either the actively swimming creatures, the nectic creatures, or the nekton, or nectos. You see it's the same root for all of them. Or the planktic creatures, those that are actually floating. And then I'll spend a little bit of time talking specifically about the marine mammals at the end. All pelagic life has this issue of they need to avoid sinking. They don't want to be on the bottom. And so they are either floaters or swimmers, and there's the division between plankton and nekton again. And you have many different ways to avoid sinking. A lot of times there are ways where they increase the buoyancy. So you see there in the cephalopods, they literally will pump gas into their shells to allow them to rise up in the water column. And fish have swim bladders, which also do a similar thing. And they can change the amount of gas in these to help them move up and down in the water column. Floating creatures, things that are so small, don't have as big an issue of that. They're just floating because of their small size. And you have many different types. The picture there shows some forams or foraminifera, but there are radiolarians and copepods. Copepods are probably one of the more important groups because they form a huge amount of the initial consumer level of the food web systems, and provide food for so many other creatures this way. And you see these things are rather complex, but they're rather small. So even though they have big swimming appendages, they're still floating plankton. There are large zooplankton, and these are even more important. So the krill are large enough for you to see. Obviously, here's a bunch stranded on a beach, and they are basically miniaturized shrimp, and they're particularly important in the extreme southern hemisphere. Other examples of floating macroscopic or large zooplankton, all kinds of jellyfishes, cnidarians, so hydrozoans and scyphozoans, things like that. But we really want to get to the nectic organisms, the actively swimming ones. These are the ones that typically fill the Discovery Channel, the Animal Planet, the National Geographic, the things that are the poster children for the oceans. Things like all the myriad numbers of different fishes, but also squids and turtles and marine mammals. And these things can move about by many different means, but principally for the squids, they suck in water and shoot it out quickly like squids, but most things will actively be swimming, whether it's fishes, these turtles, or these marine mammals. But let's talk about fishes. They swim typically by twisting their bodies back and forth with the extension of the fins on their body. That curving propels them forward, and so that's how they actively swim. And that leads to evolutionary tinkering with a lot of their fin design, because they all get to from point A to point B by this curvature of their body, but the size and dimensions of their muscle mass determine where they go. But then the fins determine whether they are a sports car or a minivan. Whether their swimming is fleet and straight in trajectory, or whether it's curving, sinewy, can they turn on a dime, that kind of thing. And so the next batch of slides sort of looks at a bunch of these tail fins in particular, the caudal fins. So there's a few slides. We'll just kind of look at these real quick. Different designs, and clearly a fish like this has different swimming lifestyles than this huge sailfish over here. This slide summarizes the different caudal tail fins and their names. So you have rounded tail fins, truncated, forked, lunated, heterocercal, and again, different pictures sort of showing these different things like this. The size of the fish and then the tail fin allow the fish to either amplify their acceleration, their speed, their cruising, their like how long can they maintain an active sort of trajectory, or their maneuverability, this business of turning on a dime. And you can place every fish, marine and freshwater, somewhere on this diagram here. We can also talk about finding prey. So for predators in the pelagic realm, they have mobility just by their nature of being up in the water column, and they typically will get their food, their prey, by one of two means. They're either lungers, sit and wait type predator, or they are big cruisers, which actively seek prey. And then there's the two groupers and tunas as examples of this thing. The adaptations they have for prey, they are extremely amplified in their speed. They're fast. They have to chase down food. And then the speed is generally proportional to size. The larger the organism, the faster they can move. These also have the characteristic that they can have quick jets of speed, but they can't maintain this for as long a period of time. We can talk about whether these certain fishes are cold-blooded or warm-blooded. Most fish are poikilothermic, meaning their body temperature is reflective of the ambient environment, and these things just kind of cruise around. They're not particularly fast. The warm-blooded fishes, those that are endothermic or homeothermic, they are far more active, faster. They're typically latitudinally restricted to the warmer environments, and they are always on the prowl for capturing prey. If we look at deep sea, deep water nekton, there are all kinds of different fishes in the deep here. I would encourage you here to look at the video that I've put up from David Attenborough's Our Planet series. It's from Netflix, really good. And there's a nice section on some of the animals of the deep and all of their unique adaptations for getting prey or just living in the deep like this. And so here's just a couple of fishes from the deep. What about those things that aren't predators, the things that are avoiding predation? Well, the most prominent example is schooling. There's always safety in numbers, and schooling maneuvers will confuse predators, and also really it's just a numbers game. Out of the 100 fish in this school, if they're attacked by a predator, a barracuda or something, only a certain number of them are going to get caught. And so if you're there with your 100 best pals, you stand a good chance of not being the one or two that's caught. Symbiosis, other things that, and commensalism, other factors for avoiding predation. Mutualism, parasitism. Here you've got Nemo sort of tucking himself in among the poison tentacles of the sea anemone, etc. So, various adaptations to avoid predation. Now let's talk about marine mammals. Marine mammals are unique because we can consistently say that they had ancestors that lived on land. And then, unlike the majority of organisms in the ocean, I mentioned there are some fish that are warm-blooded, but all of these marine mammals are warm-blooded. Also, they're breathing air. So even though they're living in the ocean, they need to regularly emerge from the ocean, stick their heads out to breathe. And then, of course, they have all of the other characteristics of mammals, the hair, the fur, the mammary glands, and things like that. Well, what are the marine mammal groups? We have the carnivores, and these are things like the polar bears, but also walruses, seals, sea lions, etc., and the sea otter. We have the sirenians, and this is this weird, slow-moving, large group, the manatees, the dugong. And then we have the whales, and whales are divided into two groups: the odontocetes, the toothed whales, which is really the sperm whale, but then porpoises and dolphins, and then the mysticetes. They call them here the mustached whales. Really, these are the whales that have baleen and have adapted to a very unique dietary lifestyle. So if we look at the carnivores as first, these are characterized by having very prominent canine teeth. Remember, this is the weaponry for them to get food. And if we look at the pinnipeds in particular, we have these different groups: the walruses, seals, sea lions. Here's different pictures of these things. Polar bears, I guess you can count in this group because they're regularly sort of fishing in the ocean, spending more time on land than in the water. These other creatures spend more time in the water than on the land. Just some differences between seals versus sea lions. I was never sure of this as a kid growing up, but here's the structures here that do these things. We have the sirenians. I really like these things. I saw one of these in Florida before, just kind of slowly cruising around in the bay, and they look like they don't have a care in the world. They certainly do. They regularly get hit by boats. They're no longer fished or used in any way, but just their habitat and their lifestyles are such that the slow-moving nature in areas that are in coastal regions where we are means that they're typically endangered, both in the Atlantic and the Pacific. And then the whales. Whales, dolphins, porpoises, and again, they don't have regular fins, sort of up and down vertical fins like the fishes. The easiest way to tell them apart, I did this since I was a kid, is they have this horizontal tail fin, so a fluke. Interesting group. Bunch of pictures of a whole bunch of them. Here's a little scuba diver for scale. And of course, we have some true giants: the blue whales, the gray whales, the humpback whales, the sperm whales, and then some smaller ones, the orcas, but really the narwhals, the porpoises, and dolphins. They have multiple adaptations for increasing their swimming speed, associations for deep diving. So some of these things dive particularly deep, like the sperm whales. You probably heard of them having deep water battles with giant squids. The cetaceans, the big thing that distinguishes them is their prominent array of teeth in the jaws, and then they also have echolocation. So they're like bats. They will send out signals through the water, travels through the water, it will bounce back, and it helps them determine shape, size, distance of objects, what they are going to try to eat. Porpoises and dolphins, again, a lot of people think they're the same thing. They're different. I'd encourage you to Google the two differences between these things, just to see them. And then the echolocation, that prominent bulge that you see on the dolphin's skull, that's where this sound is made. And they sense it and look. They can use this to great efficiency to get their food. More data on the echolocation, and then a nice picture of it. Again, this is a superior predator, a brainier predator, figuring out where its prey is, how it's moving, how fast it's moving, the direction it's moving. It has to process all of this in order to go get it. And so a lot of times we talk about their intelligence. So you've probably heard some people think that whales and porpoises, dolphins, are some of the, besides humans, are some of the brainiest or most intelligent organisms on the planet, easily as intelligent as chimpanzees. Maybe. The mysticetes, these are the baleen whales, most of these giant whales, and they have a mouth filled with fibrous plates in which they will either filter out or trap plankton creatures like krill here. So you see here this whale has opened its huge mouth, Just the mere act of opening it draws huge amounts of water in. The krill are in. Once it shuts its mouth, they're trapped and they can be sent down the gullet for further processing here. And again, the baleen whales, different types of this. And whales in particular are interesting in the biogeographic perspective because some of them are world-class migration species. So birds are the champions of the migratory world. Some of them migrate tens of thousands of kilometers. Whales, a close second. And so here's just a simple picture of the migration of gray whales from well down in the subtropics near Mexico up to above the Arctic Circle. Interesting group. Of course, they're large and they are endangered, many of them, because of whaling. Even though whaling has been banned internationally, there are a few exceptions for cultures that traditionally have used whales and hunted whales. The Japanese have a few different exceptions. There's also exceptions for certain Native American or Native Asian groups that have been hunting these things culturally for centuries, but generally no. So they have this unique characteristic of being particularly endangered.